There's a specific type of person. You can spot them in a crowd, not because they stand out, but because they don't quite land anywhere. They're in the room, but not really of the room. They laugh at the right moments, they nod, they answer when spoken to, but there's always this thin layer of glass between them and everyone else. They've been called quiet, distant, intense, hard to read, and for years, maybe their entire lives, they've moved through the world carrying this quiet suspicion that they were built slightly differently than everyone around them. Like they got the same parts, but assembled in a different order, and then, at some point, they get on a motorcycle, and something clicks. Not just in the engine. Now, before you check out, this video is not about motorcycles. I mean, yes, it's about motorcycles. But only in the way that a story about a man staring at the ocean is about the ocean. It's not. What we're actually talking about is the architecture of a certain kind of mind. The psychology of people who have always processed reality at a slightly different frequency than the people around them. And the very specific reason why the act of riding a motorcycle doesn't just appeal to them, but reorganizes something deep inside them. Because the motorcycle is just the trigger. What's really happening is something far more interesting. We're talking about control, about attention, about the way certain minds can only find peace when the stakes are real, when the margin for error is narrow, and when everything demands your full presence. We're talking about a very particular type of human being finally finding the one environment that was designed, almost accidentally, exactly for how they think. Here's what happens to your thinking when you ride. From the first moment you are moving on two wheels with nothing around you, your brain undergoes an immediate and radical shift in how it allocates attention. In everyday life, the human mind is a wanderer. Studies suggest we spend nearly 47% of our waking hours thinking about something other than what we're actually doing. That's not a flaw. That's a feature. It's how we plan, how we create, how we imagine futures that don't exist yet. But for some people, that wandering mind becomes a prison. Thoughts loop, anxiety compounds. The brain refuses to stay anywhere long enough to feel calm. On a motorcycle, that stops. Not because you force it to stop, because the environment makes it impossible to be anywhere else. Every part of your attention, your vision, your body, your balance, your spatial awareness, your prediction of what's 3 seconds ahead, all of it fuses into a single stream of presence. Psychologists call this state flow. Writers just call it writing. But what's really happening is a restructuring of perception. The architecture of your thought changes. Instead of scattered, parallel, anxious processing, your mind becomes linear, sequential, clean. And for a certain type of person, that feeling isn't just pleasant. It's the most sane they've ever felt. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control. It refers to how much a person believes they are the author of what happens to them, versus how much they feel controlled by forces outside themselves. People with a strong internal locus of control believe that their actions have real consequences, that they are steering their own life. People with an external locus of control feel like passengers. Motorcycles are mechanically one of the most literal expressions of internal locus of control that a human being can experience. Every input you give, lean angle, throttle, brake pressure, line through a corner, produces an immediate, unambiguous result. There is no buffer, no committee, no approval process. You act, and the universe responds, instantly. For people who feel like life is constantly happening to them, who feel like the world is chaotic and unpredictable and indifferent, this directness is almost overwhelming. Because suddenly, here is a system where you matter, where your decisions are real, and then there's the psychology of risk, not recklessness. That's a different conversation. We're talking about calibrated risk, the kind that forces your threat assessment systems to stay sharp and active. Research on sensation-seeking personalities, a trait identified and studied extensively by psychologist Marvin Zuckerman, shows that some people have a neurological need for environments that provide novel, complex stimulation. These aren't thrill seekers in the shallow sense. They are people whose nervous systems are calibrated for a level of engagement that ordinary life rarely provides. For them, routine isn't peaceful. It's numbing. The motorcycle provides the exact threshold of stimulation their system is wired to seek. So what does all of this build? Over time, the person who rides doesn't just become someone who owns a motorcycle, they become someone different. More themselves, actually. The independence that was always latent in them. The part that never quite fit the group, never fully trusted the consensus, gets exercised. Every solo mile on an open road is a small act of self-determination. And like a muscle, self-determination grows when you use it. Confidence follows. Not the performance of confidence. Not the social kind. The deep, quiet kind that comes from knowing you have faced real danger, made real decisions under real pressure, and come through it. That knowledge doesn't shout. It just sits in you, and it changes how you carry yourself in every other room you walk into. And then there's what happens to your relationship with fear. People who ride regularly develop something that researchers call calibrated fear tolerance. They don't become fearless. Fearlessness is recklessness. What they develop is the ability to assess fear, to recognize it, to factor it in without being paralyzed by it. And that skill, learning to sit with uncertainty, to act anyway, bleeds into everything else. Into the hard conversation you keep postponing, into the risk you keep not taking, into the life you keep almost living. But beyond all the psychology, there's something that resists clinical language. There are moments on a road, early morning, low sun, the air still cool, no one else for miles, where something happens that isn't really about riding at all. It's about identity, about who you are when no one is watching, when there's no role to perform, no expectation to meet. Just you and the movement and the world going by at a speed that makes everything feel both more real and more manageable somehow. Riders remember these moments with an unusual clarity. The specific road, the quality of the light, what they were thinking about, or more precisely, what they had stopped thinking about. These aren't just memories, they're markers. Points in time where the person became more fully themselves. And over the years, these moments accumulate into something that functions almost like an identity architecture. A private, interior story about who you are and what you're capable of. That's not something most hobbies give you. That's something closer to what used to be called a rite of passage. Here's the philosophical truth underneath all of this. Life is chaotic. It is genuinely irreducibly uncertain. And most of the things we build, routines, plans, social structures, are attempts to create the feeling of control without actually having it. Motorcycles don't offer you that illusion. They force a different relationship with the chaos. They say, the road is uncertain, the weather is uncertain, the other drivers are uncertain, and you are going to move through all of that right now with everything you have. And the people who find peace in that, who feel more alive, more focused, more themselves in that environment than anywhere else, they're not running from something. They're running toward the only version of reality that has always made sense to them. One where their attention, their decisions, and their presence actually matter. If you've made it this far and something in this resonated, not as information but as recognition, then you're probably the kind of person this channel was built for. We don't talk about gear reviews or top 10 lists here. We talk about why certain people think the way they do. Why some minds need speed or solitude or risk to feel fully alive. Why the road does something to some people that nothing else can. If that's a conversation you want to keep having, you know what to do, and it costs you nothing. There's a version of the story of every rider that starts long before the motorcycle. It starts with a kid, or a teenager, or an adult sitting in a job they don't hate but don't love, who has always had this low-frequency hum of not quite fitting. Not broken, not wrong, just running on a slightly different operating system than the people around them. And that person might spend years trying to adjust, trying to be easier, lighter, more like everyone else, trying to turn down the volume on the part of them that wants more intensity, more presence, more realness than daily life seems to offer. And then they find the thing, their thing, the context where who they are isn't a liability but a perfect match. For the people in this video, yeah, that thing is a motorcycle. But the motorcycle is almost beside the point. The real story is about finding the environment where your particular wiring makes complete sense. Where you stop apologizing for how you're built and start using it. That's not a motorcycle story, that's a human story. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not about motorcycles, about you. When was the last time you were somewhere doing something, where your mind went completely quiet? Where you weren't performing, weren't planning, weren't anywhere but exactly there? And if you can't remember, maybe it's worth asking what it would take to find that place. Leave it in the comments, I read them.